Get out of this room. Right now. Dr. Alan Peterson's voice cut through the bustling hospital ward like a blade, his finger stabbing the air toward Nurse Jessica Carter. The room, once filled with the hum of conversation and medical equipment, fell into a stunned silence. Jessica froze, her breath hitching as all eyes turned to her. The accusation hit like a slap. What had she done? I don't need a nurse who can't follow basic hygiene standards in my operating room, Peterson sneered, his words cold and slicing. Jessica clenched her fists, forcing herself to stay calm. Her heart pounded in her chest, her cheeks burned with indignation, but she refused to let it show. Who does he think he is? Dr. Peterson smirked, his gaze sweeping over her dismissively. You think wearing that uniform means you belong here? Stick to what you're qualified for. His voice dripped with condescension. If anything at all. A murmur spread through the room. Staff exchanged uneasy glances, some shifting uncomfortably. Jessica bit her lip, her mind racing. She took a small step forward, ready to speak, ready to stand her ground. But then, something shifted. Dr. Peterson's smug expression flickered. At the doorway, a senior administrator stood, their expression unreadable. But one thing was certain, this confrontation was far from unnoticed. The weight of silence pressed down as Jessica locked eyes with Dr. Peterson. He had no idea who she truly was. Hours earlier, Westlake Memorial Hospital buzzed with life as the morning shift began. Jessica arrived early, coffee in hand, offering warm greetings to the security staff. She loved this place, the fast pace, the challenges, the people. It wasn't just a job, it was her calling. Despite her position as medical director, she never flaunted her title. She preferred to blend in, donning scrubs, working alongside the nurses, and ensuring the hospital ran smoothly from every level. That's what made her respected, not power, but presence. But today felt different. As she stepped into the break room, hushed voices caught her attention. Dr. Peterson's at it again, one nurse muttered. He just snapped at Maria for not handing him a scalpel fast enough. Jessica exhaled sharply. Dr. Alan Peterson. An excellent surgeon, but his arrogance often overshadowed his skill. Complaints about his temper had circulated before, but the hospital board hesitated to take action. He saved lives, after all. Shaking off her thoughts, she checked the day's schedule. A complex heart surgery loomed in the afternoon. She wanted to check on the patient first. Then came the first clash. Jessica was in the ICU, overseeing post-op equipment checks, when Peterson stormed in, frustration rolling off him in waves. "Where's the charge nurse?" he barked. Jessica met his glare calmly. "The patient's vitals are stable. The team is monitoring closely." Peterson barely spared her a glance. "Who are you to update me on my patient?" Jessica held her ground. "I'm assisting to ensure everything runs smoothly." "Assisting?" Peterson scoffed. "Next time, let someone qualified handle it." Jessica's jaw tightened. She could feel the nurses watching. But she simply nodded. "Of course, doctor." The breaking point. Later that day, in the OR prep room, Jessica stood quietly as Peterson briefed the surgical team. She observed, ensuring everything was in order. But the moment he noticed her, his expression darkened. "You again," he snapped. "I thought I made myself clear." Jessica remained composed. "I'm here to ensure the best care for the patient." Peterson let out a harsh laugh. "Best care? Don't flatter yourself. If you want to help, stay out of my way." Jessica opened her mouth to respond, but at that moment, the scrub nurse signaled the patient was ready. Peterson pushed past her without another word. And now, the showdown. Standing in the patient's recovery room, Jessica faced him head-on. She had held her tongue long enough. The hallway behind them had filled with silent observers, staff, nurses, even patients. Dr. Peterson was about to find out exactly who he had just disrespected. And this time, Jessica wasn't backing down. His voice rose again, sharp, cutting, but this time it didn't go unchecked. A loud throat clearing from the doorway shattered the tension. The entire room shifted its focus to the new arrival. The weight in the air was undeniable. Jessica exhaled slowly, bracing herself. Stepping forward with a calm yet authoritative presence, Mr. William Harris, senior hospital administrator, let his gaze settle between Dr. Peterson and Jessica. The tension between them crackled like a live wire. Dr. Peterson. A word. Outside. His voice was measured, controlled, but there was no mistaking the firm command behind it. For the first time that day, Peterson hesitated. His face reddened, whether from embarrassment or anger, it was impossible to tell. Without sparing Jessica a glance, he strode past Mr. Harris and disappeared into the hallway. The administrator turned back, his expression softening. "Jessica, are you all right?" His voice was lower now, concern evident despite his composed demeanor. Jessica straightened, keeping her professional mask intact. "I'm fine," she said. But the tension in her clenched fists told a different story. Mr. Harris sighed. "You don't have to put up with this, you know that, right?" "I do," Jessica replied, her voice steady. "But this isn't about me. It's about making sure the team and the patients come first. I'll handle it." Mr. Harris studied her for a moment, then gave a small nod. "Let me know if you need anything." As he left to deal with Peterson, Jessica took a deep breath. The murmurs from the gathered staff faded as she refocused. She wasn't about to let one man's arrogance derail her day. But she knew one thing for sure. This wasn't over. Earlier that morning, Jessica had started her day in her office, coffee in hand, reviewing staff evaluations. Peterson's name had come up again. His pattern was impossible to ignore. Complaints about his short temper, his dismissive attitude toward nurses, especially those from minority backgrounds, had piled up over the past year. But every time Jessica brought it to the board, his surgical success rate shielded him. She was strategizing a way to address the issue without backlash when her pager buzzed. A patient in recovery needed additional monitoring. Their confidence and create a toxic work environment. That's not just my opinion, it's becoming a serious concern among the staff and the administration. Dr. Peterson scoffed, shaking his head. "Spare me the lecture. I get results. That's what matters." Jessica took a slow breath, keeping her voice steady. "Results matter, yes. But so does the team. A surgeon doesn't operate alone, Dr. Peterson. If you keep treating people like they're disposable, one day you're going to find yourself in an or with no one willing to assist you." His jaw tightened. For the first time, Jessica saw something flicker in his eyes, uncertainty, maybe even fear, but it was gone in an instant. "Is this a warning?" he asked, his voice low. "It's a fact," Jessica replied. "You have a choice. You can continue down this path until it costs you everything, or you can recognize that being a great surgeon isn't just about skill, it's about respect." Dr. Peterson stared at her, then let out a short, humorless laugh. "You think you can get rid of me?" Jessica tilted her head slightly. "I don't have to. If you keep pushing people away, you'll do that all by yourself." A tense silence stretched between them. Then, without another word, Dr. Peterson turned and walked out, his footsteps echoing down the hall. Jessica exhaled, running a hand through her hair. She knew this wasn't over. Not yet. But for the first time, she saw the cracks in his armor. And that meant change was coming, one way or another. But inside, she braced for the next move. Dr. Caroline Reed raised an eyebrow. "Are you suggesting current patient rounds involve unqualified personnel, Dr. Peterson?" Peterson leaned forward slightly, his gaze flickering toward Jessica. "I'm suggesting that certain individuals may be overstepping their roles, causing unnecessary interference in critical care situations. Clear boundaries would ensure efficiency and prevent miscommunications." Jessica met his stare without flinching. She wasn't going to let him twist the narrative. Collaboration in patient care isn't interference, Dr. Peterson, she said evenly. It's what makes this hospital function. If there's a concern about efficiency, perhaps we should discuss communication strategies rather than exclusion. The room tensed. Dr. Reed folded her hands on the table. Interesting perspective. Jessica, as medical director, what do you think would improve collaboration? Jessica didn't miss the subtle confirmation. Dr. Reed was making sure everyone remembered exactly who she was. Transparency and teamwork, Jessica replied. When a hospital fosters a culture of respect, the staff performs better and patient outcomes improve. If there are concerns about roles, I'd be happy to facilitate discussions to ensure alignment rather than division. A few murmurs of agreement echoed around the table. Peterson's jaw twitched. He had expected to put her on the defensive, not have the conversation turned back on him. Dr. Reed nodded. That sounds like a fair approach. If anyone has specific concerns about workflow, I suggest they address them directly and constructively rather than in vague generalizations. A quiet but clear checkmate. Jessica held Peterson's gaze for a second longer before looking away, signaling that she wasn't playing his game. After the meeting, Peterson brushed past her, his expression unreadable, but she could feel the tension radiating off him. She knew this wasn't over. As she walked back to her office, her phone buzzed. Another message. Watch your back. No name. No number. Jessica exhaled slowly. She had been right, Peterson wasn't done. But neither was she. One of the nurses, a younger woman named Rachel, hesitated before stepping forward. Dr. Carter, have you seen the memo? Jessica's pulse quickened. What memo? Rachel glanced at her colleagues before handing Jessica a printed sheet. The moment she saw the hospital's official letterhead, a sinking feeling settled in her stomach. She scanned the document quickly, her eyes narrowing as she read the words. Effective immediately, all medical staff must adhere to newly revised operational hierarchies to maintain efficiency and proper delegation of responsibilities. Unauthorized personnel will no longer be permitted to intervene in surgical procedures or critical care situations unless expressly designated by the department lead. It wasn't just a memo. It was a power move. Jessica exhaled slowly, keeping her expression neutral even as frustration burned beneath the surface. Peterson had wasted no time. He wasn't just trying to discredit her, he was attempting to strip away her ability to lead. Rachel shifted nervously. It was sent to all department heads this morning. Some of us think it's aimed at you. Jessica folded the paper neatly, tucking it under her arm. I appreciate you bringing this to me, she said, offering a reassuring nod. But don't worry, I'll handle it. As she continued toward her office, her mind raced. Peterson was leveraging hospital bureaucracy to box her in, using protocol as a weapon. She needed to respond, not with anger, not with emotion, but with strategy. By the time she reached her desk, she already had a plan. She picked up the phone and dialed. Mr. Harris, she said the moment he answered. We need to talk. Now. The next move. 20 minutes later, Jessica sat across from Mr. Harris in a private conference room, the memo between them. He looked at her, a grim expression on his face. I was expecting this, he admitted. Peterson's trying to tighten his grip. He wants to make sure you're locked out of anything he deems his territory. Jessica nodded. Then we need to make it clear that leadership isn't about territory. It's about teamwork. And right now, he's undermining that. Mr. Harris sighed, rubbing his temple. You know the board will be reluctant to override a new policy so soon after approving it. Peterson's using hospital politics to his advantage. Jessica leaned forward. Then I'll use facts to mine. She pulled out a folder, flipping it open to reveal a collection of staff complaints, patient safety reports, and peer reviews, all documenting Peterson's history of unprofessional behavior. These have been piling up for months. Complaints about hostility, intimidation, staff burnout, all tied to his leadership style, Jessica said firmly. This isn't just about me, Mr. Harris. It's about the hospital's culture. If the board values patient care, then they can't afford to ignore this any longer. Mr. Harris studied the documents before nodding slowly. You're right. We need to move carefully, but it's time to bring this to the board's attention officially. Jessica exhaled, steadying herself. This wasn't just about winning a battle against Peterson. This was about changing the game entirely. And she wasn't backing down. Slightly, still composed, but there was a flicker of something else beneath the surface. Uncertainty. Mr. Jenkins adjusted his glasses and looked between Jessica and Peterson. Dr. Carter has presented compelling data that supports her role in ensuring patient care runs smoothly. Given the improvements in staff morale and patient outcomes under her leadership, I find it difficult to view her involvement as disruptive. One of the senior board members, Dr. Patel, leaned forward. Dr. Peterson, you've raised concerns about interference and liability, but do you have any concrete examples where Dr. Carter's actions have negatively impacted patient care? Peterson's jaw tightened. It's not about specific incidents, it's about the principle of leadership structure. There needs to be a clear hierarchy in a hospital setting, and blurred lines can lead to inefficiencies. Dr. Patel raised an eyebrow. So, no specific examples? A heavy silence filled the room. Jessica watched as Peterson shifted slightly in his chair, clearly realizing his argument was losing traction. The board chair folded his hands together. It seems to me that the real issue here isn't Dr. Carter's performance, but a conflict in leadership styles. Given the evidence presented, I see no reason to take action against Dr. Carter at this time. However, he added, looking at both of them, we need to find a way to move forward productively. Dr. Peterson, I strongly advise you to work with Dr. Carter rather than against her. Collaboration benefits the entire hospital. Peterson's lips pressed into a thin line, but he nodded stiffly. Understood. Jessica held his gaze, offering a polite but unwavering expression. The meeting adjourned, and as she gathered her things, Mr. Harris gave her a small nod of approval. As she walked past Peterson on her way out, he spoke low enough that only she could hear. This isn't over. Jessica didn't flinch. She simply smiled, voice just as quiet but far steadier. No, it's not. But the difference is, I'm not afraid of you. With that, she turned and walked out of the boardroom, ready for whatever came next. A murmur spread through the room, some staff members exchanging glances, others nodding subtly in agreement. Jessica could feel the shift, the tension crackling like static electricity. She took a slow breath, letting the silence work in her favor before continuing. This hospital does not run on fear, she said, her gaze sweeping across the audience. It runs on trust. Trust in our colleagues, in our leadership, and most importantly, in our patients' best interests. That trust is fragile. It's built over years and can be destroyed in moments, especially when leadership becomes more about politics than patient care. She turned slightly, her eyes meeting Peterson's for the first time. You're right about one thing, Dr. Peterson, she said, her voice unwavering. We do succeed when we respect each other's roles. But respect isn't a one-way street. And it's not something that comes from titles or seniority, it comes from actions. A ripple of quiet agreement passed through the crowd. Jessica let her words settle before delivering her final point. So, if anyone here, anyone, has concerns about my leadership, my door is open. Always. Because real leadership isn't about controlling a narrative. It's about listening, about working together, and about making sure this hospital remains a place where every single staff member can do what they do best, save lives. The room fell completely silent. For the first time since stepping into that auditorium, Peterson looked genuinely uncertain. His usual confidence wavered, just for a second, before he straightened his shoulders and forced a smirk. Well, he said, stepping forward again. I suppose the board will have the final say on that. Jessica met his gaze, calm and steady. Yes, they will. And in that moment, she knew, no matter what came next, she had already won something more important than a board decision. She had won the room. This to the board immediately. If Peterson is behind this, he's crossed a line that won't be easy to walk back from. Jessica exhaled sharply, her grip tightening around the phone. He's not just coming after me, he's trying to divide the hospital, turn the staff against each other. If people start doubting leadership, patient care will suffer. That's what really matters here. Mr. Harris paused before responding. You're right. Meet me in the boardroom in 20 minutes. Bring every piece of documentation you have. We're not just defending you, we're exposing the real threat to this hospital. The fight for the truth. Jessica wasted no time. She gathered the reports she had compiled earlier, including patient outcomes, staff testimonials, and performance reviews. She also pulled up recent communications with the surgical and ICU teams, messages that directly contradicted the false claims in the email. By the time she entered the boardroom, Mr. Harris was already there, along with several other senior administrators. Their faces were grim. Mr. Jenkins looked up. We've seen the email, he said without preamble. And we take these allegations very seriously. Jessica met his gaze. So do I. She stepped forward, placing her files on the table. The accusations in that email are fabricated. The so-called evidence has been manipulated to fit a false narrative. I can prove it. One by one, she laid out her case, countering every false claim with verifiable facts. She showed the real versions of the redacted patient charts, highlighted the actual context behind the emails, and presented testimony from staff members who had worked directly with her. As she spoke, she could see the board members exchanging glances, some skeptical at first, but gradually shifting as the weight of her evidence became undeniable. When she finished, Mr. Harris spoke up. Given the anonymous nature of the email, we need to determine its source. But let's be honest, there's only one person with both the motive and the access to pull something like this off. A heavy silence filled the room. Dr. Peterson, Mr. Jenkins said finally, his expression unreadable. Jessica nodded. He has been trying to discredit me since day one. But this isn't just an attack on me, it's an attack on the integrity of this hospital. If we let this go unchallenged, what kind of message does that send to our staff? Dr. Patel, who had been quiet until now, spoke up. I agree. We need to launch a formal investigation. If Dr. Peterson is behind this, there will be consequences. Jessica exhaled, relief washing over her. The tide was turning. Mr. Jenkins straightened. We will handle this swiftly. In the meantime, Jessica, I'd advise you to prepare a public statement. The staff needs to hear the truth from you. Jessica nodded. I'll take care of it. The truth wins. Later that evening, Jessica stood in front of the hospital's gathered staff, her voice calm but unwavering as she addressed the accusations head-on. You all received an email today, an email filled with misleading information aimed at sowing doubt and division, she began, scanning the crowd. Let me be clear, I stand by every decision I've made in service of this hospital and our patients. And I will not allow lies to overshadow the truth. She went on to dismantle the false claims, presenting the real facts with quiet confidence. As she spoke, she could see the uncertainty in the room shifting, people nodding, whispering to one another, reassessing what they had believed just hours ago. By the time she finished, a round of quiet applause spread through the crowd. Peterson had tried to bury her in doubt. Instead, he had only strengthened her position. But Jessica knew this wasn't the end. Peterson wouldn't go down without a fight. And she would be ready. The final battle for leadership. Jessica had seen Peterson's tactics before, but this time, he had escalated to a new level. The email accusing her of misconduct had spread like wildfire, shaking the hospital to its core. Staff whispered in hallways, unsure of what to believe. Some trusted Jessica implicitly, while others, despite their respect for her, couldn't ignore the damaging claims that had been circulated. Mr. Harris wasted no time. We need to act fast, he told her in a hushed but firm tone, calling for an emergency board meeting. "You need to address the staff directly." Jessica hesitated for only a moment. She had spent her career fighting for integrity, and she wasn't going to stop now. That afternoon, she organized a town hall meeting, sending an open invitation to every staff member. As she stood at the podium in the packed auditorium, murmurs filled the air. The uncertainty, the tension, it was palpable. She let the silence settle before speaking, her voice steady, unwavering. "Leadership isn't about titles, it's about trust." She scanned the room, meeting the eyes of those who questioned her and those who still believed. She countered every false claim with facts, citing real patient records, staff testimonials, and official reports. Some nodded in agreement, while others remained skeptical. But Jessica could feel the shift. The staff wasn't just listening, they were thinking. However, Peterson wasn't done. The next morning, an anonymous email flooded inboxes across the hospital. Fabricated accusations, manipulated patient records, and false reports painted Jessica as reckless and incompetent. This time, there was no hesitation. Jessica marched straight to Mr. Harris's office. "We take this to the board. Now." Within 24 hours, the IT department traced the email back to Peterson's hospital account. The evidence was irrefutable. At an emergency staff meeting, Harris stood before the team and announced the findings. "The evidence is undeniable," he said, holding up the report. A ripple of shock and outrage swept through the room. Staff murmured in disbelief, realizing the truth. Peterson had not just attacked Jessica. He had betrayed the hospital itself. Peterson, cornered, denied everything. "This is a setup," he claimed. But his usual confidence wavered under the weight of the evidence. The board acted swiftly, placing him on administrative leave pending further investigation. Jessica exhaled, relieved. It felt like the war was over. But 3 days later, the real battle began. Peterson goes public. At a surprise live press conference, Peterson flipped the narrative, presenting himself as a whistleblower exposing corruption at the hospital. Cameras flashed as he held up confidential patient records, claiming they proved a pattern of negligence. Jessica watched in disbelief and fury. This was illegal. Mr. Harris didn't waste time. "We're taking legal action immediately," he told her. But Peterson wasn't finished. The next morning, a newspaper headline made Jessica's stomach drop. "Medical director's hidden past raises integrity concerns." Peterson had dug into her past, twisting an old patient case, one that had been investigated and cleared, into a manufactured scandal. Jessica refused to crumble. She gathered every document, proving that she had never been disciplined. At a staff meeting, she stood before them, transparent and unwavering. "I have nothing to hide." She laid the real evidence on the table. Some in the crowd exchanged looks, finally realizing the pattern of deception Peterson had woven. But then, the final blow came. A leaked video surfaced, heavily edited to make Jessica appear dismissive of patient concerns. It spread like wildfire online, fueling speculation. Jessica acted fast. Within hours, she and Harris released the unedited footage, showing the full truth. Jessica had been advocating for patient care, not dismissing it. That was the turning point. The fall of Peterson. The hospital staff, the public, even Jessica's former colleagues condemned Peterson's smear campaign. His attempts to destroy her reputation had backfired. Now, facing legal consequences for leaking patient records, Peterson's attorneys begged for mediation. His demands? Reinstatement. A public apology from the hospital. Damages for reputation loss. Jessica's response? A firm, unshakable no. With no options left, Peterson dropped his lawsuit, resigned, and faced suspension from practicing medicine. The hospital issued a statement reinforcing its commitment to trust, integrity, and Jessica's leadership. The battle was finally over. A new era. Weeks later, the hospital was stronger than ever. The team felt united, trust was restored, and new initiatives flourished. Maria, the young nurse who had stood by Jessica from the beginning, handed her a coffee, smiling. "You did it." Jessica looked around at the hospital she had fought to protect. "No," she said. "We did it." For the first time in months, peace had returned.